Good afternoon, class. My name is Marie Lewis, and my Milestone 2 informative speech will be on jazz music. What is jazz music? What is its history and its origins? What are the different genres of jazz music? And what has its effects been on American culture? By the end of this brief speech, I hope that you'll be able to answer all three of those questions. But first, let's take a listen to the music, shall we? I hope you enjoyed that. What you just heard was first Maple Leaf Stomp by Jelly Roll Morton, which was composed in 1915. Next, you heard an unentitled track by Erskine Hawkins Orchestra out of New York City from 1935, which featured a saxophone solo by my great uncle Paul Bascom. Next, you heard Om by saxophonist John Coltrane and his quartet, recorded in 1965. Next is Stretching by Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, recorded in 1978 and then used as a track on Diggable Planet's hit song Cool Like That in 1993. According to most, jazz music started in Congo Square in New Orleans, Louisiana. It is a mixture of African rhythms, European music, and the blues. African drumming enslaved field hollers and work songs gives jazz its rhythm. European music gave jazz its instruments, such as the piano, the drum, the trumpet, saxophone, clarinet, and slide trombone. The blues gives jazz its chords and scales. The first known sound of jazz is called ragtime. It was said to be a piano mimicking the sound of the brass band. According to Professor Brian Jump from the Community College of Allegheny County and the movie Bolden, Buddy King Bolden was said to have created this sound, though there is no known recording. In the movie Bolden from 2019, a man came to speak to Buddy and his band about recording the song. Buddy was a little bit hesitant because he did not want anyone to steal the sound. It was said that it was recorded, but the cylinder cannot be found at this time. So the first known recording of jazz music came in 1917 by the original Dixieland Band, and the song was Livery Stable, according to John Hasse of the Smithsonian's magazine. Like African music, jazz is played for different life cycles and celebrations. For the birth of a child, for the celebration of celebrating the death of a loved one, you'll sometimes hear a second line leaving a cemetery. Or as a celebration of a feast such as Mardi Gras, which is before the Lenten season. Now, let's discuss the different genres of jazz. As I go through this, you'll hear some of these names repeated a couple of times because they innovated and they grew with the music. As I stated, ragtime started from timeline is from 1890 to about 1925, and it was said to have been started by Buddy Bolden and was the sound of a brass band played on a piano. Another ragtime piano player was Scott Joplin. From 1910 to about 1930, you get Dixieland jazz, which is referred to as traditional jazz. The performances were more collective than improvised sounds. Some famous Dixieland artists is Bud Freeman, King Oliver, and Sidney Bechet. Next, from 1930 to 50, you get big band, which gives you swing music, swing dance, and the Lindy Hop. These songs were more improvised and melodies and had dramatic solos, and you got call and response from the band to those who were listening, such as Cab Calloway's Minnie the Moocher. Some famous big band orchestras are Duke Ellington's, Count Basie, and Thomas Dorsey. The next genre of jazz is bebop or bop from the 1940s to 1955. During that time, the bands got smaller. They weren't big, they were more quintets and quartets. And the arrangements were more improvised in this genre. Two of the innovators of this sound was Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Bird Parker. Next, there's cool jazz. Cool jazz had more of a classic timing, focused more on a melodic line, and solos were arranged but more improvised. Those that fall into that cool jazz category is Miles Davis, Dave Brubeck, and Chet Baker. After that, you get hard bop, which was an extension of bebop with more of a soulful sound. And those artists that gave you that sound was John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, and Horace Silver. Next, free jazz from 1959 to about 1970. It was more of an experimental sound where the musicians were able to play whatever they wanted. And most people found that sound a lot of confusing. Some famous artists that helped create that sound is Sun Ra, Ornette Coleman, and again, John Coltrane. After that, you get Afro-Cuban and Latin jazz, which sounds just like it says. It's a combo of jazz over Latin rhythms. Dizzy Gillespie is one of those artists that helped bring the sound, along with Arturo Sandoval and Tito Puente. Next, from the 1990s, you get smooth jazz, which is not called jazz by most jazz purists because of its synthesized sounds, but also has famous artists such as Kenny G, Boney James, and Dave Koz. Now, let's look at what jazz has had on American culture. It influenced fashion. In the 1920s, the flapper fashion and a dance were influenced by this music, and the Charleston was one of its most famous dances. In the swing era, like I said, gave you swing and the Lindy Hop, and the women dressed in a skirt that flowed and the men wore suits. During cool jazz era, most people wore black and they were called beatniks. Poetry was also influenced by jazz. Music and words have always gone together since jazz started. And as I stated, black music came from the field hollers and work songs of the slaves. So poetry and jazz have gone together because poets were inspired by the music and the artists. Some famous poets that were inspired by this music were Chicago's own late Oscar Brown Jr., also Langston Hughes, and Leonard Cohen. Because of the era in which this genre was created, a lot of black artists were affected by what they saw, and it sounded and you could hear it in the music. Some of the songs that reflected that was Black and Blue by Louis Armstrong, which talked about his dark skin. Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday, which talked about how she saw men hanging from trees after a lynching. In Alabama, which John Coltrane recorded after the 4 little girls were killed in that explosion in Alabama. It's also had its influence on hip-hop, as I said. Samples were used in rhymes and introduced jazz to a whole new generation. No. Diggable Planets are some of those artists that did that, as I stated. Gangstar and A Tribe Called Quest. So let's look back at what we learned. Jazz music is America's music because it is our one true art form. It is a mixture of different sounds, which includes African rhythms, the blues, and European music. from the time that Buddy Bolden started this music, this genre has grown and has become this mixture of sounds that we call gumbo. And I hope that you learned something from this. Thank you.